Righty, let's see here. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Can I do a sound check? Is anybody hearing me okay? Let's see if there's anybody. Looks like we have a couple people on. Hi, Larry. Looks like you're on. I hear you. Perfect. Is this the 15th? Yes, as far as I know, this is November 15th. Yeah, that's actually probably a pretty good point. So Larry was reminding me, yes, if you're watching this right now, this is November 15th. You're watching the live one. You didn't pull up last week. I know I'm in the same setting, so it probably looks the same, but I'm feeling a whole lot better. So hopefully this one will be a little bit different. In that way, I won't be falling asleep or trying to pass out halfway through the message this morning. All right. Well, I have just a little after 10, so we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to start this morning with some prayer requests. First off, thank you for all of your prayers. This has been a very tough week and a half, really. It's been, I think I'm on day 11 right now, and I am pretty much symptom-free. I have just a little bit of an elevated temperature that's still lingering around, and every evening, it comes in and gets a little bit elevated, but it's not really breaking that threshold of a true temperature. So anyway, so it's much better, but there's still a little bit lingering effects. I'm starting to get back my taste and smell. The taste is strange coming back. Like, I think Summer told me that everything tasted salty to her. I get the same. Everything tastes salty, and it also tastes like very minerally. I've had a lot of like almost metal taste in my mouth, which is kind of strange coming out of this too. So anyway, it's weird. It is definitely not something I would want to have again or wish on anybody. It's very draining. I've had very little energy. I've pretty much spent the last 10 days in bed. And anytime I do get up for more than just a few minutes, I'm exhausted. So, and that is still lingering. I'm feeling better, a little bit better every day. But I definitely could not go do a whole lot right now. I couldn't go for a walk. Definitely couldn't go for a bike ride. This is very fatiguing, which is actually a challenge for me because I'm restless very quickly, and this has not been a fun few days stuck in bed. So, or almost a couple weeks now, going on 2 weeks. So hopefully everybody else that's watching online is staying healthy. I know that Paul has been struggling as well. Very similar symptoms to me. He and I have texted a couple times back and forth, and so hopefully he's doing well, doing better. And we still want to keep Steve and Mary Jane in our prayers as well. I actually have not talked to them recently, so I have not gotten a good update on them and their status. But I do appreciate your prayers for me at the very least, as I know you're keeping them in your prayers as well. But I'll thank you for the prayers for me, and I'm looking forward to getting on the other side of this. So, and hopefully we will be back and meeting in person again next Sunday. That's my plan. And, as barring anything that would prevent that from happening, we will be there worshiping God together. Now, that being said, especially as we're seeing a bunch of increase in the number of cases in El Paso County, in the state, and really the nation and the world at this point, I do want to remind everyone, please do not feel obligated to come. If you're uncomfortable in any way, I will not think less of anyone. The church, our brothers and sisters, will not think less of anyone who decides to stay home for their own safety or for their health. Trust me, if you can avoid getting this, I would encourage you to do so. It's not something I would recommend at all. And so that being said, if you're not comfortable with the increases that we're seeing in the area, please don't feel bad about not coming. This is a great way that you can still participate by watching online. You can still reach out. We can communicate in other ways. We have technology. Let's use it. The other thing is, I would just remind those of you who do want to come, if you're feeling sick, stay home. It's not that we don't want you. We just don't want you there on that day. If you're not feeling well, this is one of those things that we want to try to keep people from getting it, if at all possible. So if you're feeling sick, if you're having symptoms and you're just not feeling yourself, just don't risk it. We'll be there the next week. And so if you do want to come into in-person services, we love to have you there. However, if you're not feeling well, just take a break, stay home for the week. Make sure that it's nothing serious, and then we'll see you again the next week. So those are my public service announcements for COVID-19. But basically, after living with it for the last couple weeks, I feel a little bit more confident and comfortable throwing those things out there, because from firsthand experience, I don't want to repeat this if I don't have to. So, but let's go on to some other prayer requests and praises. So if you have any right now and you're watching online, you can just chat them in the live chat. I see Steve and Donna and Larry are on there. It looks like Steve said they're improving, so great job. Praise for Steve and Mary Jane that they're improving as well. I know that was rough for them as well this last couple of weeks. So praise God for that. If you have any other prayer requests or praises and you're watching live online, just go ahead and chat them out. I do have a couple that came in through emails and phone calls and other things as well. So, and the first one I want to mention is Linda. She's actually a prayer request. She's struggling, has some problems with her computer. It looks like lots of frustration. Looks like she lost a bunch of files. So just some prayer for peace for her as she's struggling through the loss of some information, and they're trying to restore that. So we'll pray that that the files and everything else that she's lost will be restored, and that she'll be able to find some peace in the middle of such a frustrating thing. I think we all understand what it's like to have so much of our life dependent on a piece of technology nowadays. So we'll see. But keep Linda in your prayers. I'm also just saw from Steve. So they're improving, but Mary Jane is not improving as quickly, it looks like, as we would like. So she's less well. She's still struggling. They're struggling to get her off the oxygen. Definitely understandable. So let's keep Mary Jane in our prayers. Help her, pray that God will heal her quickly, that she'll be able to get off the oxygen and she'll be able to breathe fine on her own. This is, like I said, fatiguing for me. My blessing is I never was super short of breath. So I've been able to get plenty of oxygen in, so that's been good. But it's not to say that it's been easy to do so either. So struggling with this is definitely something that taxes your whole body. So yeah, Mary Jane, let's keep her in prayer as we pray that she continues to feel better. We also had a phone call from Al this week. He left a message on the church phone, and his prayer requests were basically continuing to lifting up prayers for our nation, that God's will be done. He asked for prayers for just restored health in our community in the wake of the pandemic, and may God help us through these times. And then just a prayer for our church and continue prayer for blessings and God's direction on our body. So thank you, Al, for those requests. I agree, and I think we should lift all of those up on a regular basis right now. Okay. Any others? I'm not seeing any others coming in online at the moment. I do encourage you, if you have any prayer requests and you're watching this maybe a little bit later, that you would like the church and the prayer team to be praying for specifically, you can email those at thepastors@gracefirstchurch.com, and we will get those added to the prayer team. I do want to make sure that we're continuing to keep some of the other families in our prayers. The Rottenborns, they've had a struggle with this illness as well in the family this week, and definitely keep Paul in your prayers as he's continuing to try to get better. Let me see. I don't think I brought my phone in, so I don't have any other specifics that I can look at right there. But let's keep our church family in prayer. And the only other thing I would add, and this one's a little bit embarrassing too, but I'm going to be selfish and ask for some more prayer requests for my health. One of the struggles I have right now is the last couple of days after laying in bed and probably not getting the best nutrition or anything else over the last couple of weeks. I've also developed a case of gout as of the last day and a half or 2 days. So now I'm limping around and it's hard to sleep, not because I have a fever and COVID symptoms, but because I can't move my foot. And any twitch of it causes extreme pain. And unfortunately, I probably won't be able to get any medication for this until early next week. So anyway, I have some prayers for my health in that area as well. This has only happened 2 or 3 times to me, but what a way to end COVID is to move directly into a bout of that. So anyway, please keep that in prayer. I would appreciate that as well. All right. I don't see any other ones. I've rambled on long enough, so let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning. Heavenly Father, I give you glory and I give you praise for all things, Father, even in the midst of things that are uncomfortable, painful, Father, in things that are frustrating us. Father, regardless of what it is, whether it's physical illness or technological problems and frustrations, or whether it's the stress that comes from caring for a loved one who's not doing well, Father, or whether it's just situation in life and our communities right now, Father, whatever brings stress into our life, whatever brings that worry, Father, I pray that this morning, right now, this very instance, Father, that we can release those to you. Father, great pastor that so many of us are familiar with. One of those that we hear quotes from all the time is that we can do 2 things when these types of pressures come into our life. We can worry or we can pray. And Father, right now we're choosing to pray. So we just want to release all of these burdens, Father. You invite us to take your yoke, Father, so that you can share our burdens, Father, and that we can share yours, which are so much easier and lighter to carry. And I just pray that this morning, as we open up the Word, Father, that you will teach us something that we may not have known about ourselves or may not have known about you this morning. Reveal something in us, Father, that you want us to work on and to change and to grow. Father, reveal something within us, Father, that you are doing so that we can just be excited about seeing your hand at work in our lives. Regardless of the difficulties in life, Father, especially mine the last week or so, Father, I give you glory for it, because even in the discomfort and the sickness and all the frustration and the mental and emotional pain that goes along with the physical, Father, even in those moments, Father, I felt your presence and I felt the prayers of those who are interceding on my behalf. And so I thank you for that. I thank you for friendships. I thank you for the power of prayer. And Father, I pray that this message now will be just something we can dedicate to you, and that you will teach us, and that we will be able to leave today, turn off the computer when we're done, and we'll be able to take a little bit of what you taught us today, Father, apply it to our lives next week, Father, and be better witnesses for the goodness and graciousness of you and your Son, Jesus. For it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right. So this morning we are continuing our sermon series on the parables, and we actually have two kind of short parables that we're going to talk about this morning. And we're going to be in Luke chapter 14. And the first parable is going to basically start in verse 28, but I'm going to start reading actually in verse 25 and kind of give us the full context of the situation here. So in Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 25, we read, it says, "Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple." So the title of the passage, at least in the ESV translation for the header of this, is basically the cost of discipleship. And there are two stories here that we're going to kind of talk into, deconstruct a little bit, and then apply to our modern day life, if possible, this morning. And the first one is in that verse 28. I'm going to go back and talk about the context that Jesus is sharing this in, and kind of that very uncomfortable statement about hating our family that Jesus demands of us, and kind of what he's talking about there. We're going to dig into that, but we're going to do that a little bit later towards the end of the message. So right now, though, I just want to focus on these two stories about counting the cost. And the first one I'll read again. And it starts in verse 28. It says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish." So I'm not sure if you guys have the outline on YouVersion, if that's showing up or not. We did it this morning. Sometimes it doesn't post, but if you do have it, the first fill in there in your outline, or you can just write this down on whatever notes you're taking right now, is the first thing we learn from the first story is don't start something you can't finish. Now, this is not an absolute truth. There's a lot of things that I think are worthwhile starting, even if you can't finish it. But for this story and for the context, we'll dig into what I mean here. But the first point is don't start something you can't finish. And so the situation, the story Jesus tells us is a man began this building project, basically, and didn't have enough money to finish the building. And so you have a half-finished structure. If we actually look at all of that today, I mean, I've seen some of this in my own lifetime. I've seen big buildings, or maybe apartment complexes or things like that have been started and then they actually never finish, or it takes a long time before they're finished, usually because of some financial difficulty. Whether it's like we experienced several years ago in the housing market crash, where we had new homes that just construction projects that just never completed because of the housing crash, or maybe residential buildings and stuff like that. And even that, as might be something that we see again in the not so near future. Or the not so far away future, in the near future, just because as we see the effects of this pandemic and the shutdowns and everything else continue to have ramifications on our various economies and stuff like that, where I would not be surprised to see the same type of thing again. But in this case, it might have even been a little bit more embarrassing and a little bit more severe, because one of the things when we're talking about here says, it says, "For which are you desiring to build a tower?" So this isn't someone trying to build just a house. It might have been maybe a tower to store grain or something like that. But what it would most likely was talking about is building a kind of a watchtower, a tower that you can that you would build to oversee maybe your fields or maybe your housing kind of complex for safety based purposes. So remember, they didn't have surveillance cameras back in this time, and there wasn't you couldn't just go rent a security guard company for most cases with radios and everything else. And so the way that you would protect your property or protect your fields is you would build these towers that you can oversee it, whether it's you're protecting it from actual people or you're protecting it from some other threat, or maybe you're just trying to get a good idea. I think in my mind, the idea of one of those watchtowers that we used to have for, they still have them for the Forest Service, right? So you have the fire watchtowers out in the middle of the forest, usually up on a big hill that you can stand. You can kind of just look around and you can see everything, and you can tell if there's a fire or not in that area. And that was one of the ways for years that the Forest Service would watch for wildfires. So that was just one of the methods. So that's what I picture in this. And so this idea of this man who goes out to build this tower and then runs out of money halfway is kind of, it says right here, all who see it begin to mock him. The word mock here is supposed to mean exactly that. It's something actually very severe. And it's when we put it in the context of why they would have been building this tower, it makes even a little bit more sense, because it's not like they were just trying to do an investment in something that they, overextended themselves on. But this was for a particular purpose, probably for the well-being of themselves or their crop or their land or their household. And so this idea that he begins to build it and doesn't have enough money to finish it would be, quite frankly, very embarrassing. Especially in that culture. We've talked a lot about that the last couple of weeks, is honor shame culture. The idea of starting such a project for such an important reason and getting it halfway done is embarrassing. And one of the reasons it's embarrassing is because you've already invested so much of this financial capital into something, and you don't get any of the benefit out of it. So it's just literally a waste of money and a waste of time. So this first part of the parable that Jesus is saying is like, don't start something you can't finish. And so I was thinking about, well, what is it in discipleship? What is it about following Jesus in our attempts to follow Jesus? What are the things, or what's something at least, that we tend to start but are unable to finish? And why would that be dangerous? And so I have a note here in my outline anyway. It says, our spiritual formation is not something we can finish. It is only God that can complete that work within us. So in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, Paul writes, says, and I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. And so where am I going with this? Well, I think personally, when I try to take this particular story and apply it to my own life or to the life of a disciple or a follower of Jesus, is that the first thing that comes out is our sanctification, our spiritual formation, the being made more like Jesus, is something that I think a lot of people start under their own strength, and then they suffer for it later. And they maybe never even realize the importance that it's not something that we can do on our own anyway, and that's why so many people struggle with it. And so the example I would have is, I know a lot of people that commit to maybe a Bible reading plan. And they start off great in the first few weeks or whatever else in the days, but by the time the year comes up, or however long the reading plan is, they've fallen away and they haven't finished it. Daily quiet times, Bible studies, or maybe people make a commitment and say, I'm going to go to church every week this month. And so we have these things that we are trying to do to help our Christian formation and our spiritual formation move along, but we end up failing at so many of them so often. This is one of those things I continue to struggle with myself on a regular basis. And it takes a level of discipline, and it takes a level of commitment that most of us, quite frankly, don't possess. And even if we do, the funny thing about our spiritual formation is the people who latch onto this idea and say, oh, well, if I just read my Bible every day, or I do this plan, or I do these Bible studies, I'm going to become a better Christian. And those things don't make you a better Christian. Doesn't matter how much of the Bible you read. It doesn't matter how much you go to church. It doesn't matter, how much you pray. None of those things in and of themselves make you a better Christian. What those things do is, when we do those things and we're consistent with them, is what we're doing is we're providing the opportunity for the Holy Spirit to grow us, if that makes sense. We're putting ourselves in a situation that allows God to speak to us, God to teach us, the Holy Spirit to change us. But it's God's Holy Spirit, it's God's working within us that forms us to become Jesus Christ, to become like Jesus Christ. It says in Philippians, I'll read it again, and I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you, so is God who began the work, will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. It's God's working within this, and it doesn't finish until the day we die and until the day we meet Jesus. And so it's this continuous process that God began and that God completes in us. And one of the things I think that Jesus was talking about to these followers, these crowds of people that were following him and just going everywhere he was going. He turned around to them and said, hey, be careful. Don't just follow along because you think it's a good idea or you think you're going to gain something out of it. You got to realize that this is a lifelong journey, that this isn't something you just do for a little while until you get your fix or you feel better about life or whatever else, and then you can just leave it behind. Following me is a lifelong journey. You can't just grow your spiritual life in spurts and just get enough out of it that you want and then cast it aside until the next crisis that comes in your life, right? Because that's the other way we see this play out, is we see people turn to God and turn back to church and turn back to the Bible when they reach some crisis in their life. Now, I'm not saying when you reach a crisis in your life, don't turn to God. In fact, there's a good reason why people do that, is because God has probably brought them to that point where they've finally said, hey, I can't do this on my own. But the point is they realize that they can't do this on their own. And so they turn it over, they surrender their spiritual formation, as it were, to Jesus. And that attitude is something that we have to have every single day. It's not something that that once we have that moment, that from that point on we can be called complete Christians. It's exactly that type of attitude that Jesus is encouraging us to have every single day. The attitude that's going to deny myself, to take up my cross and follow him, and says, hey, I have to depend on you, Jesus, every single day. And that's what he's telling these followers to have, is like, first of all, they can't grow their spiritual life themselves. It's impossible for any of us to do that. We're human beings. God is spirit. And if we want to see our spiritual life mature and grow, God has to be a part of it. But the other thing is, we can't approach it with the attitude that that we're going to make it happen. We can give God opportunities to make it happen within us, but we can't force ourselves to grow. We talked about this several sermons ago, with the idea of growth and spiritual growth. And it is something that God does within us, and it's a mystery. And it's not something we can force to make happen. So that's kind of this first situation. This man goes to build a tower. It was probably for an important reason, to maybe overlook a field for safety, protection, and he doesn't have enough to finish it. And so basically he wastes all that time, all that effort, all that money, and everybody else looks around at him and mocks him because of the embarrassment that would have caused. And I was trying to think of, well, what's the situation? Something that just should never happen, but does. And so I have a how we can relate. I'm doing two how we can relate. The first one for this first parable is, how can we relate to this? I would say running out of gas or running out of gasoline, right? When we think about it, for the majority of the cases, there is never an excuse in a modern day vehicle in the world we live in that we should run out of gas. we have these little things called gas gauges on our cars. Probably my wife's newer car, actually, I think all of our cars at this point even gives us the estimated range. It says, hey, you have 200 miles before empty. And so the fact that we run out of gas or even risk running out of gas today is actually a little embarrassing, and it might incur a little bit of mocking from our friends if that happens, because we don't really have an excuse for it. However, it still happens all the time, and I'll be the first one to admit I have not run out of gas in the last few years, but I came really close. I was talking about my wife's car, and so this time last year, or around this time last year, we went on vacation, and we were driving, and we were actually driving to Oklahoma, and it was late at night, and we were running through a few different towns, before we actually made it to Oklahoma City area. And we were driving, and I look at the distance, and I knew we had a certain number of miles, and I was trying to optimize my time, so I didn't want to stop too early, because then I would have to stop at least one more time before we made it into town, based off how many miles per gallon we were getting in the vehicle. And so I kind of picked it and estimated it and said, okay, we just need to stop here sometime in this range. And so we got to that town, but I was pulling a trailer. The gas stations were on the left side of the street, and said, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. I'll go to the next town 10 miles up ahead and we'll be fine. And then, we go up and we're driving, and the town 10 miles ahead or whatever else, it wasn't really a town. It was just a pull off. There didn't look to be a gas station, so we kept driving. And, and I'm like, oh, we'll be fine, because I'm looking at the gas gauge here, and it says estimated miles per gallon to the finish. And so I said, oh, we'll be fine. And then I'm just noticing that the estimated mileage is decreasing a lot faster than the mileage we are progressing. So in other words, every mile marker, rather than going down 1 in my estimated range, I'm going down like 1.5 or 2. And now I'm starting to get a little worried, because if you've ever been to certain places of Oklahoma or Kansas, I think we were probably driving through Kansas at the moment, I don't know, but sometimes there's stops few and far between. And so for the next little while, there was no town. And we're watching the gas gauge and the estimated range decrease much faster than the range of the on the GPS where the next town was coming up. And my wife, I haven't talked to her about this, so I'm going to speak for her in a sermon, which is always scary to do. But I will just say my wife was not encouraging, because she had been telling me several of the stops before, you should just go ahead and stop and get gas now. It's dark. We don't know where the next spot's going to be. Let's just go ahead and get it. And I'm telling her, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So by this point, I'm starting to get nervous. And I'm like, I don't know what we're doing. And so I'm trying to, I'm easy on the gas and putting it on cruise control, or I'm trying to draft semis, anything I can do to get a little bit more mileage out of this. And Summer, I would say, she and the kids started to mock me. That's the only way I could describe it. There was a lot of, oh, yeah, there'll be another gas station right around the corner. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder who's going to get to walk to go get to the gas when we run out. And so I was just getting blasted by my family. And to be honest, it was actually very, very much deserved, because my she would call it arrogance. I will call it my positive outlook on life. But regardless, my outlook and my thought process is, oh, there'll be a gas station up here. We won't have anything to worry about. And in fact, that was not the case. Now, we did not run out of gas. I can say that you can go an extra 5 to 10 miles in my wife's car after it goes to 0 range. So I know you can at least make it that far, because that's about how far we had to drive on 0. And trust me, I was freaking out. But we're going along, and we're driving down. It's the middle of the night. We have no idea where we really are, and there's a gas station that we see the lights on. It looks good. We're able to make it, and I did not run out of gas. My point though is, that is an example of something that we never should have had to face. It's an example of something that we should not be surprised if we're mocked for if this occurs. And it's another example of something that it just proves that sometimes things are outside of your control. We're going down. Yes, it wasn't necessarily my fault that a couple of those gas stations that we thought we'd stop at were closed. I don't know why gas stations aren't open 24/7 anymore, but there are some that still aren't. Wasn't really inside my control. It wasn't really my fault that pulling the trailer was decreasing my gas mileage, and I couldn't actually drive as far on a tank of gas as I could without the trailer, and so that the computer in the car was a little confused. Not exactly my fault, but something that factored into this and things like that. And where I'm going with that is following Jesus is not something we can do lightly. It's not something you can kind of just coast by and skate by and say, oh, there'll be another opportunity. There'll be another opportunity to read my Bible or to go to church or to have that conversation with my neighbor. There'll be another opportunity. Yeah, there will be other opportunities, but that type of attitude invites destruction. That type of attitude invites problems that, quite frankly, we are not qualified to handle on our own. And it's a dangerous approach to our spiritual growth. So yes, God's going to work it out. God's going to take care of us. God's going to grow us regardless. But if we don't take the opportunities when God presents themselves, if we're not filling up the gas tank early and often, we run the risk of running out at the time we need it the most. And that's just a caution here that I think we can apply to our lives. So the second parable in this is kind of similar teaching. And it starts in verse 31. It says, or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So this second parable, I kind of have the main teaching being this: don't fight battles you can't win. So if the first one was don't start something you can't finish, the second is like it: don't fight battles you can't win. And that's kind of the story here. We get this idea of a king. He's going into battle. He has 10,000 people. He's about to face an army of 20,000 people. So he has to make a decision, and he's going to count the costs, and he's going to say, okay, can I actually win? Do I have the position? Do I have the expertise and the experience and the stronger fighters? Do I have what it takes to go up to someone, that's twice my size and win? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. In other words, when you weigh that cost and the king says, yeah, I don't think I can do this, the king should be smart enough and is smart enough to say, hey, let's make a deal, way before the guy actually comes and ever, draws the battle lines themselves. And so this other comparison is another example that Jesus is teaching about weighing the cost, counting the cost. And so I was thinking, just to apply this a little bit to ourselves today, is like, what is a battle that we try to face on our own all the time in our spiritual life and our discipleship and our following of Jesus? And I think one of the biggest battle is obviously sin. So don't fight battles you can't win. And so I have in parentheses right there, just sin next to that. Now, I'm not saying you don't fight sin, that you don't fight that struggle within you. In fact, we're going to read right here that Paul does that on a regular basis. But I have a note in my outline. It says, our battle with sin is not something we can win. It is only Christ in us that can defeat the sin within us. Our battle with sin is nothing, folks, that we of our own strength can win. And yet it's so often a battle that we find ourselves facing on our own strength. In Romans chapter 7, Paul writes, and starting in verse 15, and many of you have heard this before, It's a little confusing, so try to follow along, but I'll summarize at the end. It says, Paul writes, "For I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law, waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" And then he goes on in verse 25 to answer that question. "Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ, our Lord." So Paul is describing, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, at least if I am with myself, I've felt like this before. And it's like, oh, why did I say that? Or why did I do that, right? You mess up and you're like, why am I continuing to be such a jerk to my family? Or why am I continuing to say those things and maybe ridicule or accuse people in that way? Or why do I have this attitude? Or why do I have this sin that so desperately clings to me? And I don't want to do these things, but I find myself doing them. And there's just this struggle, there's this battle, there's this war that is raging within us. And it's called sin. And Paul kind of describes it in just that way. It's like the things I want to do, I can't seem to do. I can't seem to be consistent in my quiet time. I can't seem to be consistent in fellowship with my brothers and sisters in Christ. I can't seem to devote myself to prayer. But the things I don't want to do, things like treating people badly, or lying, or self-afflicting addictions, those things I want to stop, I can't stop. And Paul is summing up this challenge of what I would call life, and he's doing a good job of just explaining how conflicted we are inside, and how much of a battle sin wages in our lives on a regular daily basis. And he's saying he says, "What a wretched man that I am. Who will deliver me from this body of death?" And then thanks be to God through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Our battle with sin is not something we can win. It is only Christ in us that can defeat the sin within us. And I think when Jesus is giving this example of this king who's counting the cost, the king that is going into battle and is weighing, does he have the strength to face this enemy on his own, or does he need to sue for peace? This same type of thought process and evaluation is something that we should be applying to ourselves as we seek to follow Jesus. And he's saying the same thing, is like, what is the battle that you're facing in life? What is it that you are trying to overcome? What is it that you are trying to conquer? And we need to look at our lives and our own spiritual life and say, do I have the tools and the strength necessary to do this? And if the answer is no, and I will give you a hint, if the answer is no, on our own, we do not, then we have to say, well, what can we do about this? Now, in this parable, he goes and he asks for, tries to put in a peace treaty right before the battle ever occurs. But with the battle of sin, that's not an option, right? The wages of sin is death. There's no middle ground here. And so if we're going to face sin, we should be counting the cost, seeing that we are insufficient, and saying, hey, I need reinforcements. And obviously that reinforcement is Jesus. So obviously that reinforcement is the gift of his salvation, where he pays those wages of sin. He paid the death, the cost. and the price of sin for us. And so don't fight battles you can't win. I think that's the other teaching here. I was thinking, okay, well, what's a modern day equivalent of a battle that I can't win, right? Because I'm not a king, I don't have an army, I don't count costs in the same way. But if you're married, you've all heard it before, choose your battles. So I would say arguments with a spouse would probably be a good modern day analogy for this, where I fail at this miserably, and where my wife and I will start to get in an argument or discussion. And if anybody was looking over my shoulders, if I was looking over my own shoulder, I would probably tap myself on the shoulder and say, Smokey, you should let this go. This is not a battle you want to fight. I don't hear that person ever until it's way too late. But those are the situations, right, where we come into, we have this relationship with our spouse, or maybe it's another family member or whatever else, and we lose sight, and we overinflate our ability to win this argument, and we look at our measly 10,000 person army compared to their 20,000 person army, and we're like, I can take him, and we attempt to do so. For me, anyway, that usually ends up being so much worse, because not only do I lose the battle, but I usually cause a few more battles to incur as well. And so this idea of choosing your arguments, choosing your battles, is consistent when we apply those things to our relationships, especially to the relationships with our spouse. There are some things that aren't important enough to battle my wife about. And unfortunately, when I spend all my time and effort battling with her on the non-important issues of life, it ultimately costs me resources and time and soldiers, or however you want to draw the analogy, for when the bigger battles of life come, right? Because if I can't have a discussion with my wife, and I lose by losing my temper, or burning some of those things, or saying something that's unkind, that's only going to make the next discussion harder. And it's the same way with our battle with sin. See, we get to the point where we think, well, I can do this on my own. I can kick this addiction. I can change my attitude. I can be a better person. And so we have that in our mind. But what happens is we devote so much of our energy to trying to fix this thing within us, and that when we fail, not only have we not met the goal, but we've wasted so much of our energy that we're weaker. And now it's the ability for that sin to come back and take hold is even stronger. So we see this a lot of times in things like addiction, where we go and someone's clean for a little while, they go a little longer, but when they get back and they finally they don't have the strength to continue, and they backslide, a lot of times they backslide even worse, right? They become even in a darker place than where they were the first time. So I'm not saying that these things are important, that sin is not something that we should battle. What I am saying, and what Jesus is saying, is count the cost and understand how hard this is going to be. And you need to learn that you can't do it on your own. You don't have the strength to do it on your own. So recruit some reinforcements. Find a general that can lead you to victory. And don't be naive and think that you can face every battle in life that comes along on your own strength. All right, so how should we respond this morning? Here's a couple examples of Jesus just telling people to count the cost, but I want to bring it back. So the how should we respond is the same thing he was telling them. Count the cost. Okay, count the cost. What are we talking about here? And I have 3 points. The first one is this: following Jesus will cost us the approval of people. Jesus wants people that are coming to him to know that if they follow him, they're going to have to suffer in some of their earthly relationships. So it says in verse 25, now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. You've probably heard this talked about before, but Jesus isn't saying that we should hate the same way that we're thinking about it, but it's the idea of loving less. In other words, and especially for this culture, family was everything. Family was literally defined your life. You weren't an individual, you were part of a family. And so what Jesus is saying is, if you want to be part of my family, that has to trump your earthly family. And what it really teaches us is that following Jesus will cost us the approval of some people. Not everyone is going to agree with your choice to be a Christian, to follow Jesus. And Jesus was looking at all of these crowds following him, and he said, hey, you're following me now because I'm doing these miracles, I'm teaching all these unique things, and I'm doing these things that you find attractive. But there's going to be times when I'm not going to be the attractive option. I'm not going to be the choice that everyone is following. And I'm going to be something that's going to cause ridicule, and ridicule even by your family and your friends and your social status. And Jesus says that's part of the cost of following him. So count it, understand it. Following Jesus will cost us the approval of people. Not might, but will cost us the approval of people. The next thing, following Jesus will cost us our pride. In verse 27, it says, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. This idea of bearing his own cross, and the idea, the crucifixion, everyone understood. So a condemned criminal was forced to carry his cross, or usually the cross beam of the cross, to his execution. We see that, and Jesus did the same thing when he was crucified. And that was part of the crucifixion process. And it was just an example of not only are you condemned, not only are you about to die, but you have to bear the burden of the very thing that you will die upon. And then Jesus is saying, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. He says that following Jesus will cost us our pride. We will have to, in certain situations in life, have to say, you know what? I can't do this on my own. I have to depend on Jesus. I have to depend on Christ. I'm not smart enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not clever enough. We will get to the point that following Jesus will force us to admit those things, not just to ourselves and not just to God, but to other people as well. And we will have to say that. But we'll have to say those words out loud. And we will have to say, I can't do this on my own. I cannot do this on my own. That's hard for a lot of people to say. But Jesus says following him will demand we say it, that we will be forced to take up our cross and follow him. The third thing that Jesus says in counting the cost is that following Jesus will cost us our possessions. In verse 33, it says, so therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. We've talked about this several times already over the last few months, but the idea that everything that we possess, all of our time, our money, our talents, everything that we have is not really ours once we become a Christian. We say, hey, God, this is yours. I'm just a steward. And following Jesus will cost us our possessions, where we say, hey, I don't own any of it. And it's this idea of abandonment. Not to say that if you follow Jesus, you have to become a monk, a hermit. It means that everything you have, whether it's your bank account or your possessions, your house, your time, all of it, you said, God, use it as you want to use it. Let me use it to bless you or bless other people and glorify you. And following Jesus will cost us our possessions. There's never a moment in time where Jesus says, yeah, come and follow me, but hey, you can live your life the way you want to. I'll just take you on the weekends. you can spend the money the way you want. I'll just ask for 10%. No, that's not discipleship. That's not following Jesus. Jesus says, hey, you make me Lord of your life. Give me full control of everything you have. And then you can follow me and you can be my disciple. So that's just an example. So following Jesus will cost us our possessions. How should we respond? We count the cost. So I would ask you right now to think, what are the things that you are not willing to lose for the sake of Christ? See, that's what Jesus was kind of turning around and telling the crowd. Think about the things that you're not willing to lose, because to follow me, you have to be willing to lose everything. What are the things that you're clinging on to? What are the things that you want control of in your life? Those are the things that Jesus is saying right now to these people. Those are the things you have to give up. Is it your family? Is it your own pride? Is it your possessions? What is it? What is it that's keeping you from being 100% completely sold out for Jesus? And I'd ask you all that question this morning. I have a quote here. If you are not willing to pay the cost of abandoning self, then you will eventually come to a point where you abandon Jesus. I'll read that again. If you are not willing to pay the costs of abandoning self, then you will eventually come to a point where you abandon Jesus. That's the warning here. I think we see this in the disciples. The disciples show us the difference here. And, I've always thought about it as like, well, Peter rejected Jesus and denied Jesus and abandoned Jesus. All the disciples abandoned Jesus, the night before his death. And so we'll say that to ourselves to justify this attitude of abandoning Jesus. But there's a warning here. They abandoned Jesus, the man, the teacher, the person they had been following. They did not abandon Jesus, the Messiah, right? Because they weren't sure at that point that he was the Messiah. So they go and they're following, and the night Jesus is arrested, he comes and gets arrested and everybody scatters. This was not a good thing for the disciples. This is not a good look. But we have to remember at this point in time, they did not fully recognize and understand who Jesus really was. And so what they abandoned was the man, the limited being that they had observed, without fully understanding who they were observing. The disciples, they kind of show us the difference between following a man versus the Messiah. At that point in time, they were just following the good teacher, Jesus. After Jesus rose from the grave and after he came back and he ministered with his disciples, the apostles for like 40 days before he ascended into heaven, the disciples never abandoned Jesus again. They, each and every one of them, died proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah. Most of them, although really one of them, a painful physical death. As far as we know, John was just died of old age in isolation. But the point is this: every single one of them that ran when the man was arrested, they didn't run when the Messiah was reigning. When they saw Jesus come back from the grave, they said, I can't reject this. At that point, they finally understood the cost of following Jesus, and they said, it takes my entire life. Everything I have, even my physical life, is his to do with the way he wants. And so that's some encouragement and a warning for us is don't look at the disciples before Jesus rose from the grave. Don't look at them as justification to abandon him, because it's not. Those same people never abandoned Jesus again after he rose. And so we know that Jesus rose. That's what we're claiming in our life. So there is never an excuse to abandon him. And so if you are not willing to pay the costs of abandoning self, then you will eventually come to a point where you abandon Jesus. That's the teaching this week, guys. I'm thankful that you guys stuck around. It was long this morning. It is a little bit harder doing this in front of a camera and instead of in front of people. Feel free to pause, fast forward, or just turn it off if you need to. I won't be offended in any way, but I do pray that this has challenged you this morning. I know it's challenged me. Examine the cost of discipleship, examining the things in your life this week that you are trying to hold on to, and that you just, when you're honest with yourself, say, I'm not willing to give this up, and then learn to give it up. That's what Jesus commands of us. It's not something that's easy. It's not something that there's a quick solution for. It takes time, it takes devotion, but most importantly, it takes surrender. So, hey, have a great week. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in person next Sunday. Please reach out if there's any prayer requests that you have this week. If anything comes up, if anyone else comes down sick, please let us know. We definitely want to pray for those. And for those who have been praying for me, I thank you. For those who have provided meals for us this week, I thank you. And for all things, I give God glory. It's been a great week, great learning opportunity. Hopefully you guys can learn from some of us who have gone through this and don't have to learn it the hard way yourselves. So have a great week, and God bless.